ugly little black horse only. It's the horse that, or the devil that persuaded Prometheus to revolt against the gods.
Across vast Tartarus, where was not earth, nor sky, nor air, and from the ancient whirlwind conceived an egg. The egg lay
Mike, could we take it back to the place where the fanfare is? I can't hear the girls. Yeah, to the here then.
Okay. Hear then of the birth of the gods and of primal darkness.
I say again that daily to discourse about virtue, and of those other things about which you hear me examining myself and others, is the greatest good of man, and that the unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates here seems to be talking directly to us when he says that daily to discourse about virtue is the greatest good of man, and that the unexamined life is not worth living. We ought to reflect about that a little. Why should we examine our lives to make them worth living?
Certainly, we can live without examining anything, but living as men in the full sense of the term cannot be done without examination. And if we are to be really animals, then...
Well, what kind of notion of what a man really is do you suppose he has? So that he can say that a man, in order to live, has to examine his life?
Certainly it sounds to me as though it's a lot of talk. That's what the first part of it seems to say. We ought to spend our life talking about virtue and other things, but talking. I know a lot of people would say, well, that's mere talk. Is it so clear that talking is that important? It's fun.
Well, not just talking as such, but what is said and what is trying to be accomplished. I mean, you can just go out and gossip. This is not what he wants.
But he's not simply... Socrates, he's saying this is what makes life livable, almost implying that one is not fully living unless one examines what life in general.
That is rather a startling statement when you come to think of it. It isn't what most people would say, is it?
Well, it's not startling considering Socrates, and that's what he does.
But he says this is, by implication, he says it's for all men. And that's almost suggesting that most men aren't alive.
But most men would say, wouldn't they, that it is important to somehow know that you are living right, or somehow strive toward doing the things that you think are right? I think that most men would say that. And then to carry that on further is just the question, well, how do you know? If you don't question, you don't examine.
Wouldn't most people say that their life is worth living if they're having a lot of fun? Isn't that in general what people would say?
I don't know.
If they were honest.
I don't know what having fun, you mean just in a very sort of superficial thing of you mean
Why do you call it superficial?
Well, I was thinking of more opposing it to perhaps the philosophical concept of happiness or something is much different than what most people think of as having fun.
And do you think most people would think that that kind of a life is worth living?
Which one?
The life of Socrates.
No.
Definitio legis, quae nihil est aliud, quam quaedam rationis ordinatio ad bonum commune, ab eo qui curam communitatis habet, promulgata.
Comment ce changement s'est-il fait? Je l'ignore. Qu'est-ce qui peut rendre Je crois pouvoir résoudre cette question.
We can never, by our utmost scrutiny, discover anything but one event following another, without being able to comprehend any force or power by which the cause operates or any connection
Третье
between
утверждает,
any
что причина движения заключается в дыме, относимом ветром.
Has that any relevance to the words changement? Mr. Matlin?
I was going to say that you might possibly say man is born for freedom. And everywhere, just to paraphrase this, we see him under bad government, living under bad governments. And that's what the chains are.
That's somewhat of an extreme jump from the literal sentence. And
at least, I'm not sure if it is an extreme jump, except insofar as we're translating free as meaning for freedom. But the interesting thing is that Mr. Matlin's offered a completely different interpretation of this metaphorical expression in chains.
I think it means the chains of bad civil government.
Do you agree with that?
It's not a statement of moral indignation, and he's not saying that everywhere we see men in a state of slavery, but that everywhere we see men living under badly managed governments that make them slaves.
What did you understand dans les faire by? What literal interpretation did you give to dans les faire, Miss Golub?
Well, I guess on the basis of the rest of the treatise, that it meant some kind of political slavery.
So then the whole thing becomes political, and means man is born free, meaning by, according to Mr. Matlin, for political freedom, and everywhere he is in political bondage.
I think that makes a certain amount of sense because he later on says that he's going to examine the social order.
Break off as well here. So let me ask, what is the theme of this invention?
Well, I think it's in the first 8 measures, in the top 2 voices, in the interplay of the top 2 voices, and especially where they seem to be punctuated.
You mean the whole of these 8 measures?
Yeah, especially because it's repeated almost exactly at the very end of the invention.
I would just say that I don't think that there is a theme as such. I think there's a rhythmic pattern an interval and rhythmic pattern that's repeated throughout the piece in all 3 voices. And the fact that the right hand is very closely tied with the left hand.
Excuse me, hand is not a musical concept. What do you mean, the right hand?
Oh, the treble clef and the middle voice together.
That's better.
Would not constitute a theme alone. and the repetition, I think, is only to bring back the G minor, is to emphasize the return to G minor.
What is this that doesn't constitute a theme alone? It's not the first eight bars. That.
Do you mean the first 5 notes in the...
The first 5 notes in the top voice. Yes. As it's
You mean
repeated.
this?
I don't see how that could be a theme.
Why not?
It's hardly, to my mind, a profile of the whole piece.
But you would agree that this is sort of an important thing throughout the piece.
Yes.
This idea, and he works with it, and the octave here becomes, for instance, later. The octave becomes what here? That's not an octave now. It's a 7th, so the octave becomes a 7th. He works it quite elastically. But anyway, this pattern somehow is important all through the piece. So why do you not call it a theme?
Excuse me, it's sort of a statement of something.
A statement of something.
You're actually, it's like a sentence. It's complete in itself, and yet it can be developed. And this isn't complete in itself at all.
Well, using your analogy of a sentence, though, then this little pattern could be called, I guess, the important word in the sentence.
What is a sentence here you talk about?
The first 8 measures.
So first 8 measures would constitute a sentence. Now, if you have a sentence in language, that what is said in the sentence holds it together, so to say, is it? And gives it sort of unity and meaning. Now, what holds that together?
Holds the first 8 bars together.
Well, it seems that you have this rhythmic pattern of the first 5 notes, and it's repeated in the second measure. But in the 3rd and 4th, it seems that somehow you've gone on to an additional, can we say, a word, an additional word, which is also rhythmic and has a certain pattern, and this seems to be used throughout the invention also.
You mean this dotted thing?
Yes, this also has a certain rhythm.
Quite prominent all the way through, so it's a combination of these 2 things.
Yes, and they are often played at the same time.
They are kind of, I think here they are kind of material which builds the whole of these 8 measures. And what ties the 8 measures together beyond the repetition of material?
The rhythm, largely.
No, there's also an octave there. From so the 4th note in the treble is
what?
Is a G, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the first note in every measure following that in the same voice is F, E, D, C, down to G.
Up to?
Well, down to G.
Well, dynamically, 8, 7, 6, few. How? Wait a moment. 8. That's just the point. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Manipulate history for your own greater glory, but rather the private life. Pierre and Natasha relationship, which is a free relationship.
And is there such a thing as a private life which is uninfluenced by history?
Hey, Bob,
Don't
you have a
forget
copy
the
of John
opening
Donne to lend me? What's it worth to you?
The conversation is about history, about events.
Where you going with your money in your hand? Hey Joe, where you going with your money in your hand?
Machiavelli is completely right in everything he says.
No, he's not. Absolutely not. He's morally wrong.
No, he's not morally wrong. The point is that he doesn't say anything about morals.
Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed, to turn aside the needy from judgment.
Throw down Archimedes, please. Just a minute. Here it is. Thanks. Models actually trying to show.
Well, they try to represent what light is.
What do you need models for to show that?
Well, since you can't see light...
What do you mean you can't see light?
Well, you don't ever see what light is. You see the reflections.
Then how do the models demonstrate or help to explain what light is? I don't understand.
Well, they're purely hypothetical.
There is a willow grows aslant a brook that shows his hoar leaves in the glassy stream. There with fantastic garlands did she come, of crowflowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples.
If b squared minus 4ac equals 0, we'll have an ellipse. Delta equals 2 times the quantity 4a prime, c prime, f prime.
Well, that's a physical phenomenon. That I mean, there are just five.
Well, now how does Euclid start? He has definitions that we might be able to say he defines things into existence, and yet you say, well, there are only 5 regular solids. The 5 regular solids that he has derived from these definitions, axioms, and postulates. And you say, well, that's a physical fact.
Now, wait a minute. Let me see if I'm understanding you. Here, it seems to me, on the one hand, there was a notion of a mathematical system beginning with axioms, definitions, and postulates, which, in a certain sense, we haven't said exactly how, determine the course of development because of what is given to begin with. But now, Mr. Rasmussen has put another aspect, I almost said dimension, another aspect to the problem when he says that the thing is limited by the physical. I thought this was pure mathematics, Mr. Rasmussen.
Well, any mathematics is limited by the postulates and definitions that it begins with.
Well, then, is this the way these two things come together? Are you saying that Euclid's axioms, definitions, and postulates are somehow related to the space that we experience, and that the 13 books are an exploration of three-dimensional space?
They can't possibly be just an exploration of three-dimensional space because of the fact that many of the propositions don't relate to spatial concepts. I mean, in books 7 and 5 especially, the concept of ratio, while you can see two lines which have certain dimensions or certain lengths and are in certain ratios, I don't think there's much that's physical about at least those books and some of the other propositions also.
Well, all right, to say we'll leave the problem of the definitions for a minute, your first statement was that somehow these solids only 5 solids are in the physical world. Where have you ever come in contact with any of the 5 regular solids in the physical world?
Well, I can construct them.
This, of course, is the great galaxy in the constellation Andromeda, Messier 31. You'll notice in this picture the 2 companion galaxies, which are quite unlike our own companions. These are elliptical galaxies, and our own Magellanic Clouds are, of course, irregular galaxies. Next week, at our next session, Bill Harvey will deliver a report that he's been preparing for the last few weeks on this galaxy. Until that time, I'm afraid our own time has run out this week, and we'll have to call this session of the Astronomy Club quits.
Count wants to see this again. He doesn't believe it. You have to see it with your mind's eye.
Not with 1,000 sensual eyes.
Your mind's eye. See? There.
Oh, I can't imagine that thing having a soul.
No, the thing is, if we can get it to turn itself on and then turn itself off, then we'll have it.
Projection of all points equidistant from the origin, which is in Euclidean space is the sphere that comes in the Minkowski space, the hyperbola formed by rotating the hyperbola.
This is what Gonzalo Peyton proposed.
Why would you protest rather than propose?
It seems to me that he weeps.
Now, any good system has got to have a good arm, a good turntable, and a good amplifier.
I think my Weathers turntable's about the best on the market.
Yeah, and my 40 watts will drive anything around.
Yeah, it drove me out of the dorm last night.
Okay, but what does it mean?
$63.4.
63.4, right.
.847. I'm beginning to think this clock only has one number. .846.
That's at 40 centimeters?
Yes.
849.
All right, Barbara. Oops. We didn't have the clock running that time. Let's try it again.
Ready?
Yes. 0.846 seconds. All right, Barbara.
We have a set of data now and a graph relating distance and time that we've measured for the simple pendulum. I think the problem which presents itself to us at this point is to ask whether there's some precise mathematical function which would describe this motion. If I label the figure OAB, and this distance of the bob from the center of motion I call S, the function would be in the form S equals S of t.
I think I remember a function that will work in here. If you take a sine function generally, its second derivative is proportional to the function itself, and that's pretty much what this says. And let me try it and see what happens. If I take S of t to be the sine of some constant times t, the first derivative would be, using these letters, omega cosine omega t. The second derivative would be omega squared times minus the sine omega t, but to make it look better, like the one down here, I'll put the minus sign in front. And now, it looks like I might have solved the equation, because here, if I write this a little differently and say that it's equal to minus g over L times s, s is the function that we took the second derivative of. Here's a constant with a minus sign in front of it. Now here's the constant. Here's the function that the original function was, that I'm taking the second derivative
You
of.
want to identify your two constants.
And here's the constant. This constant is this one. And there's the minus sign. Anybody see anything wrong with that?
Well, have we really solved the original problem, though, Mr. Silich? We wanted initially to get a function s equals s of t, and you've now offered one, but it was to tell us precisely what the positions of the simple pendulum would be as a function of time. That is, I think it presupposed Galileo's faith that nature is mathematical and that this function was an exact description.
But is the problem actually within the mathematics itself, or is it within nature itself?
This is the problem I want to put before us, really. What are we doing when we take a mathematical science with all its rigor and apply it to data taken from nature, or apply it to a problem in nature? Do we expect to make that fit?
Well, the great man has a choice. Any man has a choice of either fighting nature or becoming its ally. If one fights nature, one is not a great man. One's just destroyed in the onward movement. But to become nature's ally means to truly understand what the way things are, and by any standard, it seems to me, understanding is a necessary characteristic of a great man. We never call an ignorant man great.
But I don't think I was saying that Kutuzov was nature's ally, but rather he was nature's tool, and not only a tool, but a non-acting tool, simply that through which nature allowed its forces to flow. He didn't have the dignity of an ally.
But that's not Miss Shaw's view, is it?
No, I think it's much more active than that, because otherwise, in the same sense, then Napoleon too is an ally of nature. I mean, how would you distinguish between the way nature might flow through Napoleon and through Kutuzov?
There's a parallel in Tolstoy. Remember that Napoleon is like a child who sits in a carriage, pulling at the strap by the door and thinking that he's driving the carriage.
Well, we're all, it seems to me, beating around the conception of Napoleon, who in the history book seems to be running everything, and yet in this novel is totally ineffectual as far as one can tell.
That's why I don't quite understand your contrast between the private life and the political life, because in fact, it seems to me in this book there's no contrast whatsoever. The political life is in a sense non-existent, and in another sense all life is political life.
But there are political effects to the actions of these men, only that the effects are not the type that they would try to bring about. For instance, Kutuzov has a political effect merely through his inaction.
Does Kutuzov affect politics? I thought that he was merely by his inaction, not affecting it in any direction which he felt it ought to flow, but merely allowing the flow to go as it would.
Yes, but, well...
So that in a sense he didn't affect anything.
Well, a sort of negative effect in that he doesn't attempt to impede the direction in which it's going.
Well, could he? As far as I understand it, the only effect an attempt at impeding the flow of history has is that the individual gets crushed in the onward march.
You mean that is Tolstoy's opinion?
Yeah.
There is, in fact, doesn't Tolstoy use the notion of the infinitesimal calculus, that the curve of history is made up simply of the very insignificant accomplishments or failure of accomplishments of each individual. Each individual event, which is totaled up by the calculus, has a very wide freedom.